football.
The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
It is really a new day in Washington. Star defensive end, 2 years left on his contract, wants out. Most attractive place for him to go is Washington, D.C. I mean, I'm not talking about Dan Snyder overpaying for bad guys like Dana Stubblefield and the worst of them all, Albert Hainsworth. This is a star player who's a mensch and continues to perform at a high level. And the way things are lining up with cap space, with draft picks, it could happen. It may not happen, but the fact that it could happen here and the player may want to come here, that's really a new day. And we'll talk more about the Myles Garrett situation as he is publicly asked out of Cleveland and what that means moving forward. Carson Wentz is at the Super Bowl. And, well, I guess it's the second year he's at the Super Bowl with Kansas City. And no, he was with Los Angeles last year, wasn't he? So this is his first time back at the Super Bowl since he was injured when Philadelphia won back in 2018. And, the way his career started off, we would have thought he'd be a regular in Super Bowls wearing green. But he's going to be on the sideline probably for most of the game. Chiefs hope for most, if not all, of the game with Patrick Mahomes staying healthy. But what a long and winding road it's been for him as he talked to J.P. Finley of NBC4. We'll get to that later this hour. And also, Cooper Manning. It's really funny. I think he's the funniest of the Mannings. He was on yesterday with Dan Patrick and told a couple of stories about the brothers and also his son, Arch, who's finally going to have an opportunity to play at Texas after sitting on the bench for 2 years there, and what it's like to be a parent of a quarterback like that. We'll get to all that. But, the announcement yesterday, it was a statement that was put out by Myles Garrett, and he said, among other things, quote, "While I've loved calling this city my home, my desire to win and compete on the biggest stages won't allow me to be complacent. The goal was never to go from Cleveland to Canton. It has always been to compete for and win a Super Bowl." So he's saying that, he realizes with the situation they've got, with the terrible Deshaun Watson contract hanging over them for another year, and coming off another rotten season with the Horizon not looking like they're going to be a great team anytime soon, he wants to get out and he wants to win a Super Bowl. It's not really about money. He's got 2 years left on his contract. Wherever he goes, whoever trades for him is going to have to extend his contract. Otherwise, it's not going to be worth it for him. You don't let him sit for 2 years under a deal that he's underpaid, and he is. He's way below market value where he is as one who's been a consistent sacker for the last 5-6 years. He's had 14 or more sacks, I believe, in the last 4 years, maybe 5 years. So he's a very, very valuable guy, and it is just so refreshing to hear that, hey, you know what? The best place for him is Washington, D.C. If you want to go to a winner, you want to go to the Commanders. Mina Kimes from ESPN saying yesterday the Commanders have the cap space and they're on the minds of everybody also because they fit Garrett's parameters and they are a contender. So, could this happen? Will this happen? Albert Breer of SI.com on the Dan Patrick Show yesterday on the statement that was put out by Myles Garrett and the prognosis for a deal.
What's really interesting about it to me is that he went public the way that he did, which sort of tells you the truth, which the truth is that the request has been in. And the idea of going public is that he's frustrated that they're not accommodating him. And so, I think what going public does for him now is it puts him in a position to it puts the Browns in a position where they don't have to pick up the phone at all. They can say we're not changing our position. We are what we are. But calls are going to come in. Obviously he is what he is, which is probably, one of the top 5 or so defensive players of the last decade. So
what's he worth?
I think the baseline is 2 first-round picks. So I think you start at that number and then go from there. It's what Jalen Ramsey got. It's what Laramie Tunsil got now. I think, you got to do something to get the Browns' attention. So maybe it winds up being more than that. The other thing you have to remember, 2 first-round picks sounds like this eye-popping haul. The reality is most of the teams that are going to want Myles Garrett are going to be teams that are in a win-now spot, and their picks are going to be down in the 20s or even the 30s, So, I expect there to be a lot of interest. And, the Browns' position is what it should be right now, which is like we're not trading a generational player. We were in the playoffs 2 years ago. I think for another team coming in, it's like you really have to do something to get their attention.
We've talked about this before, Deion Sanders' impact on the draft with his son, and there was a report that Deion would not want his son to go to the Cleveland Browns if they were to take him. Would that scare off the Cleveland Browns, in your opinion?
I don't know that he's going that high anyway, but I think it's something they'd have to consider. And, I think we saw it 20 years ago when a guy has an NFL dad. Generally, those guys are more business-minded. I think you can even see it with the way a Patrick Surtain carries himself. It's when a guy's got a dad who's been through it and went through it, they generally have they naturally have a really good feel for the way the business works. And I don't blame Deion for looking at it and saying, I just want my kid in a good situation. I want my kid in a situation that's going to give him the best chance to have a 10, 15-year career as a starter in the NFL. And I think Deion's smart enough to know that, you look at the best quarterbacks in the league, how many went into bad circumstances? We always talk about how they go to bad teams. Josh Allen was drafted by a playoff team. Lamar Jackson was drafted by a playoff team. Patrick Mahomes was drafted by a playoff team. All of those teams were in the playoffs the year before, so they weren't going to broken situations. Not to say they wouldn't have made it anyway, but they went to situations that weren't just complete train wrecks. So, I think Deion obviously has been around long enough to know it and see the difference between one thing and another, and obviously wants what's best for his son.
But you look at Cleveland, it's almost like that is the epicenter of the NFL because you got Deshaun Watson, they have the number 2 pick, and then you have the Myles Garrett situation. You play in a very competitive division as well. I don't know, are they closer to being good or closer to being really bad?
I think they're in an interesting spot in that the core that they have only has so many more shots. You know what I mean? So you got Myles Garrett going into year 9. You have Denzel Ward going into year 8. You've got some really good linemen. Joel Bitonio has been there forever, who are starting to age. I still think it's a good operation. If you look at what they've done, over the last 5 years versus where they were before that, they've made the playoffs twice. And the second time they made the playoffs, it was amid the Deshaun Watson thing completely falling apart on them. So I think it's a good operation that it made a really big mistake in trading for Deshaun Watson, and they got to live with that and they got to wear that. But I still think.
But how long do you live with it?
Well, I think now is where you don't live with it. Now this is where, and I've said this since November. This plan is not new. It is not directly related to the second Achilles tear. When Deshaun Watson went down based on where they were, they had made the decision we are no longer going to coddle him or protect him. Because last year, one of the reasons they didn't bring Joe Flacco back was because that may not have been healthy for Deshaun. Because having Joe, the team could look at him and say, Deshaun, the team could look and say, we've got a better option in the room with him, Joe Flacco. And that wouldn't have been great for Deshaun coming off of that injury. After what they went through this year, they made the conscious decision, and this was in season, they made the decision, we're at the very least going to add competition to the room. So rather than trying to build a quarterback room to support him, we're gonna put somebody in there who could take his job. And so that was a baseline before he had the second Achilles tear. And then he has the second Achilles tear, and now, again, it's just how, to me, it's when you're looking at guys like Garrett and Ward on that roster, it's timelines. It's can we fix the quarterback position fast enough to get good enough to compete at a high enough level to contend for a championship while Garrett and Ward and some of those other guys still have something left?
Well, we'll see about that. That's Albert Breer, SI.com. The Browns will make that pitch, I'm sure, to Garrett. Look, it's a 2-year rebuild, so we'll give you a contract extension. We're going to make you more in line with the player that you are. And we'll have a team within 2 years that can contend. We'll see. I mean, a lot of it's going to depend, as we watched here for a long time, how soon you get that quarterback. They got that quarterback here, and look at how the world has changed. The other thing he points out there is the teams that are going to be going after Garrett, or the teams that he's going to want to go to, are contending teams picking low. Commanders have the 29th pick this year. If you give up 2 number ones, that's 29 this year, and you hope to be in the same ballpark next year, pie in the sky, you're at 32. What's the big deal? They once, prior to free agency, look this up in the history books, kids, I think it was 1988, may have been 1989, that there was no free agency. That didn't come into the NFL until 1993. And Bobby Beathard was the GM of the Redskins. Joe Gibbs was the coach. 2 number ones was a lot to give up, but that's how the rules worked. It was called the Rozelle rule. And the commissioner decided compensation, even though Rozelle, well, I guess Rozelle was still on the job then. And the commissioner decided that if you pick a star player up in free agency, no actual thing such as free agency because teams had control over the players, but if the player's contract was up, as it was with Wilbur Marshall in Chicago, you could sign him and you had to give up 2 number ones, which they did. And Marshall was a huge, huge part of the defense of that 1991 team that won the Super Bowl. So the 2 number ones were well worth it. And in this case, 2 number ones would obviously be well worth it, I would think. Well, I say obviously. I believe it would be worth it for the Commanders to give those 2 picks up. But Daniel Jeremiah of the NFL Network, he was on with Rich Eisen, a little bit different view than Breer. He believes that it would be in the best interest of the Browns to trade Myles Garrett.
Personally, and I know they've said, Andrew Berry has said, we're not moving him. I think Myles Garrett did them a huge, huge favor because I do think it's in their best interest to trade him. But if he doesn't demand a trade and you trade him, you're going to have a big section of your fan base. And having worked there, I know how this is. In Cleveland, because the team success hasn't been there, they're very attached to their guys. And they can say, look, Joe Thomas was here from start to finish. He's our guy, and he's going straight into the Hall of Fame. And maybe our teams weren't all that great, but he's our guy. Like, that's what we're going to hold on to. And Myles Garrett the same way. So if he would have just traded him without Myles Garrett requesting a trade, there's a bunch of people that would be like, how do you trade a first ballot Hall of Famer? It's all it's kind of all we got here. We have our stars, and he's one of those. Now you can just say, look, we would have kept. He didn't want to be here. So at that point in time, this allows you to start collecting assets for the future, and kind of have a little reset period here, because you can look at it and say he is an unbelievable player, but when you don't have the quarterback, to some degree, it doesn't even matter. So I tend to believe, I think that their quarterback is in the 26th draft. And I would be doing everything I could, to get as many resources in 26 and 27, which would allow me to get that accomplished. And also I wouldn't be, opposed to them even trading down in this draft to get more resources for the future. But that's where I am.
So, what do you think the cost is going to be? What is Andrew Berry going to demand now that you think that Myles Garrett is taking the pressure off of him by saying, "I want out"? What do you think?
I think you get 2 ones. And then, maybe there's maybe if it's a team that's picking in the back of the first round, maybe it's, this year's one, next year's one, plus a little something extra, maybe a player, another pick. I don't think you can get 3 ones, but I think you can get 2. And if you're picking at the bottom, which if he wants to go to a winner, I would imagine, they would do their best to try and accommodate him from that standpoint. So there will be a lot of teams picking at the back of the draft, be interested in that one.
Washington? I mean, that's the one that just keeps leaping at me because he checks a box of that they're on the rise. It checks a box for the Browns that they get him out of conference. Detroit obviously checks that box too. So those are a couple that just leap to mind on that front.
NFC side, I mean, 100% I would make a case.
Rams? Do you think the Rams could? I mean,
they don't really need him. It's crazy to say it, but their young D-line is so good. I mean, they're so cheap. That was the first thing I thought of. As soon as I saw that he was like, well, Les probably already texted him because he's so aggressive. But I'm looking at their team, and, I mean, he's got one of the best defensive lines in the NFL right now, and they're young and cheap. So, I don't know that that's the right one for them. But Detroit, 100%. I mean, that is, you put him on the opposite side of Hutchinson, and That'll solve a lot of your problems.
Well, you certainly don't want to see that because more than likely for the Commanders to get back to the Super Bowl, they'll have to go through Detroit again. Could be here, which would be helpful, but you'd rather see Myles Garrett in burgundy and gold than blue and silver, I would think. And here's the other important thing to remember about what the next 2 years mean. You have a rare opportunity. This just doesn't come along this often in the NFL, that you have that guy at quarterback under a rookie deal. He's under contract for the next 4 years as part of the rookie contract. That's the way that works. And then for year 5, you could pick up the option, and it escalates to whatever it escalates to. The real big money is going to come in the next contract. If he has another couple of years like this, then you're certainly going to extend him after 3 years. And that's when the money's going to kick in, and he's going to be eating up a significant portion of your salary cap. He's due. This is incredible. Some of it has to do with the signing bonus that he got, $25 million. But the other part of it is the way that things are structured. For the next 2 years, they're going to only owe him $6.5 million. That's less money than Marcus Mariota made this year. You take advantage of that. Go for it. Go for it now. I know it seems counterintuitive with Dan Snyder always going for it, but the way things have been set up with the cap room that they have, and to strike gold at quarterback with a quarterback under a rookie deal for the next 2 years, Adam Peters, go crazy, baby. Go crazy. And if you can make a deal for Myles Garrett, you got to do it. You got to find a way to do it. And I don't know if that'll actually happen. It may be Detroit is more of a team that's in a smaller window. But remember, they got Jared Goff on a big contract right now. Not the biggest, but big enough. And that will handicap them to some degree. Washington's would have a huge need here. And to have a dominant defensive end like that for this defense, be tremendous. So keep an eye on that. Meantime, Super Bowl yak, and this is something that I always did at Super Bowls. You seek out guys who have connections to D.C., and J.P. Findlay of Channel 4 found Carson Wentz, who's the Chiefs' backup, did a little reminiscing about D.C., his thoughts on their success and where he is right now. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Later this hour, we'll look back on 56 years ago today when Vince Lombardi was introduced as the head coach of the Washington Redskins. And I'm sure you're too young to remember this. I assume you are, but I am. I remember this, and I remember the optimism, the excitement. Now, football was a lot different then. You didn't have free agency, so it was difficult to build up quickly. You had to do it with draft picks, but they had just hired the greatest coach in NFL history. Vince Lombardi won 5 championships, including the first 2 Super Bowls, in just 9 years with Green Bay. Got burnt out, spent a year as the general manager of the team, couldn't stand it, missed coaching. Edward Bennett Williams, who was the managing partner of the team at the time, he convinced Lombardi to come to Washington, offering him 5% of the team. Now, think about that now. I don't even know how to do the math, but if you offered a coach 5% of a team these days, like the Commanders, worth $6 billion, whoo-hoo, how they could do that anymore. You just give him a lot of money. But sadly, he lived only 1 year, died of cancer before the start of the 1970 season. But he delivered a winning season. And just the feeling in town with the football team had a very similar feel to the way it does right now. With this team coming off a great season, trip to the NFC Championship game, finding a quarterback, finding a general manager, finding a coach, and most importantly, eradicating the old owner for ownership that really seems to know what the hell they're doing. That is a huge new day for football in Washington, and it seemed like a new day for football in Washington when Lombardi came. Nobody was thinking Super Bowl the first year, but watching what he had done in Green Bay when he came in, 1959, he had him in the championship game the following year, 1960, and 2 years later won his first title. And over the next, if he's there 9 years, so 7 years, he won 5 championships. Pretty darn good. Pretty good. All right. This was from the Super Bowl the other day. I don't think it was yesterday. J.P. Finley, Channel 4, there with the camera crew. And I used to do this all the time when I went to Super Bowls. You look for guys who have connections to D.C. And Carson Wentz is one of those guys, man, it's not that long ago. I mean, if you go back to the 2016 season when he was a rookie, the feelings about his future in Philly were very similar to the ones that we feel here now for Jayden Daniels. Now, in retrospect, there were warning signs that wasn't going to work out because he was very selfish, according to reports. He certainly was not the leader that Daniels is. Apparently didn't have the work ethic that Daniels has, studying film and things like that. But he was one of those guys. He could run, he could pass, he's big and strong, bigger and stronger than Daniels. And, the feeling was he's going to hold up. And then in his second year, as the Eagles are having a great year on their way to the Super Bowl, he injures his knee, and he's not the one that wins the Super Bowl for Philly, and then things went downhill. It was only 3 seasons ago that he wound up here with Ron Rivera spending the offseason just telling everybody, oh, yeah, we got the guy, and all those things you heard about him being hated in Philadelphia and Indianapolis. Not true. They love him. I had him over at my house. I saw the way he played with his kids. He played golf with his teammates, and they hung out with him. They liked him. We didn't hear anything terrible about him, but he wasn't good. He wasn't good. He got hurt. And then they brought him back, and he stunk up the joint against Cleveland. That was the game where Ron Rivera was informed that later on the day that the team could be eliminated if Green Bay would win. And he said, we can be eliminated? Really? Yeah. Yeah, you could. And that was the end of Carson Wentz. He was, I guess, out of football for the first half of the 2023 season, and then wound up in Los Angeles as a backup. And then this year was signed by Kansas City, where he's backed up Patrick Mahomes and hasn't had to play any meaningful football. And when he has gotten to play, he hasn't been very good, but he has a chance to get a Super Bowl ring. Second one, really, because he got one in Philadelphia where he was hurt, and he could get one again as a backup. And when he was roaming around at Media Day the other day, or what do they call it, Media Night, the nighttime stuff that they do at the Superdome, J.P. Finley, Channel 4, talked to him about his one-year experience in D.C.
That was a weird year. Played 6 games, got hurt, and then came back for one more and didn't deliver when I needed to. And so it all went fast on that front, but we had a great time. We enjoyed our time there. Again, a lot of good friendships and memories out there. And but after that unfolded, and now being at home for a while last year, and being a part of 2 really good organizations, 2 winning teams, I've learned a lot. I've grown a lot, and I've seen a lot. Whatever that's worth, I don't know. The future will decide all that stuff. But I'm grateful to be here in this moment with these guys, and it's a big part of the reason, and really the main reason why I wanted to come here this offseason was to win and be here in this moment and to be with Coach Reed and this winning culture.
Even back in D.C., you talked about the journey, being a part of it. How much does Andy Reid mean to you?
It means a lot. He means a lot, and I think, again, a big reason why I chose to come here was because of him and his success, but also his play calling ability, all the things that everybody in the media world and everybody else knows. But I get to see him on a personal level and get to know him, and he's in some of those meetings and all that stuff, and he's just a guy I've always respected, but now my respect's through the roof, seeing him firsthand.
Did you see any of the success Washington did have this year? Jayden Daniels, any of your old teammates, just happy to see it?
I was pumped for him, especially like Zach Ertz, another guy, and seeing his success. Talked to him a lot, Terry McLaurin, all, still stay in touch with those guys. Obviously, it looks different over there with the new coaching staff, all the new things over there. But I was excited to see them have some success for sure. And Jayden's a stud. It's clear as day. I think they got a good one out there.
Oh yeah, they got a good one, and long time coming. A lot of wading through the wilderness with the Carson Wentzes of the world, right? Ryan Fitzpatrick, who lasted 16 snaps. All the things that went on here over the years, and now to have finally gotten to this point. And, you never can predict with these quarterbacks, and there are always cautionary tales, and he's one of them. A guy seemingly on his way to superstardom. You could see him in a gold jacket someday. And good for him. He's making a living, making a nice living, holding the clipboard, and on a team that could win a Super Bowl. He could collect his second ring without stepping on the field. It's a pretty good thing, too. But that was Carson Wentz the other day with J.P. Finley. Cooper Manning, I guess the least known of the Mannings, even his son, right? If you had to rank the Mannings in terms of who's the most famous, you'd have Peyton number 1. Eli has moved up the charts quickly to number 2. I'm from a generation where Archie Manning would have been high on the list, but he's dropped down. So I would put Archie Manning below Arch Manning, who is the son of Cooper Manning, or Cooper, as his parents call him. And maybe you'd put Archie at number 5. But they're all quarterbacks. We've had Eli and Peyton both as first-round number 1s, both of them 2-time Super Bowl winners. And who knows, 10, 15 years from now, we may be looking at Arch Manning in the same way. And Cooper now is the football dad. He's the one with, I guess, the most, I don't want to say tragic because it's not tragic, but given his hopes and dreams, he had the most disappointment of the Manning football players. The dad, he went to the wrong team in the Saints, but he had a legendary career at Ole Miss, played in the league a long time. You had Peyton, drafted number one by the Colts. He won a Super Bowl there, another one with Denver, and Eli won 2 of them with the New York Giants. And now Cooper is better known as Arch's dad, the latest in the lineage of quarterbacks from the Manning family, and he will finally get his chance to start next year at Texas after sitting on the bench for 2 years behind Quinn Ewers. This was Cooper Manning yesterday discussing that on the Dan Patrick Show.
At any point, does your son come home and say, Mom, Dad, I want to talk to you. Should I stay? I can go play right away some other place.
No, I think having your children struggle with some things is good. I mean, yeah, it's frustrating not to play. Did he love it? No. Was it probably good for him in the long run? Yes. And so you don't want your kiddos to come home and be unhappy, but at the same time, sometimes going through a little hardship and some bumps in the road are good. Arch is going to have plenty more of those. These are the real ones. When you get beat this year and have bad games, I mean, they're, how they do in the media. They crown you way too early, and then they jump on and kill you.
Yeah.
And so he's getting over way too much attention and way too much credit, and he's going to struggle. And they're going to say he's not as good, he's overrated. It's coming. Everybody knows it, so it's kind of easy to see the writing on the wall.
But you can tell him that is going to happen. Eli can tell him. Peyton can tell him. But until he goes through that,
right? It's no fun to go through it. But it's going to happen. It's inevitable. No one has this football is hard, and playing quarterback is really hard, especially when all eyes are on you. So it's just part of the deal. It's part of growing up, and everybody likes a guy who can get beat down and come back. You got to keep coming.
What do you like during a game?
Well, last couple of years, it's been pretty fun. I've kind of enjoyed just being the backup quarterback's dad. It's pretty delightful, actually.
We always like the backup quarterback.
I'm the crown prince of the parent section. I can do no wrong. But I think I'll be a lot more nervous and just probably biting fingernails and head down. But I like sitting with the parents. Texas has a great parent section and a good family-oriented group. We sit with the fans and sit in the stands with them and. A good group.
Yeah, and look at this from the dad's perspective. If in fact Arch came home and was disappointed about sitting on the bench, which Cooper pretty much confirms there, Cooper says, look, I came out of high school, star receiver with my brother, son of Archie Manning. I go to dad's alma mater, Ole Miss, expecting to be a great wide receiver there, one who might be able to play in the NFL. And before I'm able to play a game, they find out he's got stenosis and is going to have to end his football career. And had to have a very serious operation and recovered to the point where he can, walk around, obviously. But football was over. His dream died before he ever stepped on the field. So I think that's a good parent perspective as well for Arch, who finally will be the starting quarterback next year at Texas. One more from Cooper, and this is and I love this Manning cast. I think it's tremendous. And so this is Cooper talking to Dan Patrick about his brothers, particularly, and I did not think this would happen. The breakout star is Eli Manning. We knew we knew that Peyton was good. Peyton's been doing commercials for 100 years. He's great. He's great on TV. He's in movies. But we didn't know this about Eli. And this is Cooper on what he's seen from his youngest brother as he's emerged as kind of a TV star.
I loved Eli. The real Eli came out in the Manning cast.
Yeah, you know,
he was stealth.
My dad said the other day, he's like, it took Eli till he was 40 till he got a personality. You know, I mean, he is absolutely in his element. He's so comfortable back there. He's literally in his garage. I mean, he goes downstairs in his basement. I mean, he just walks downstairs from the den and hooks up a mic and is like, all right, let's talk football. And I think that was kind of the whole intention of this thing evolving, is that Peyton said, look, I don't want to be on the road on, Fridays and then going to practice on Saturdays and waiting Sundays to do a game. And then kind of with COVID and Zooms and the idea of being able to do things a little more remote came to fruition. He's at a buddy of his down the road who's got this great man cave. He was renovating his house, and he called his buddy and said, hey, can we hook it up there? And it's there to stay.
Oh, I love
that. Peyton loves it, and he loves the prep still. He loves preparation. He loves talking to the coaches. He's got plenty of guys that help him, breaking down film. And so.
But Peyton gets so bothered by mistakes when he's watching.
Yeah.
Like, I can't imagine what, be a teammate of his.
How about a high school coach of his son coming up? Think he's going to be getting a few voice memos on Saturday morning? Goodness gracious.
I remember asking Tony Dungy, I said, how do you think Peyton would be as an analyst on TV? And he goes, he would drive everybody crazy with his preparation. He would drive everybody. You would be like, stop.
Peyton is prepared for everything. I mean, he's already, if we have a golf match in May, he's already concerned.
Walking the course.
Do I have my transportation lined up, and where am I going to park? I mean, he is a detail-oriented guy, and he doesn't sit still well, and his brain is always, it's moving. You see him sometimes just kind of off in the corner like to himself, and it's wheels are turning.
I do love that Eli, I don't know if he got a personality at 40. I think he felt comfortable to showcase his personality to his brother. And he slices and dices Peyton, and it's really great to see.
He's really one of the few people that does that with really, where Peyton doesn't kind of keep a note like I'm going to return this favor in 5 years after what Dan Patrick said about me. Yeah.
Well, Peyton held a grudge for 5 years against me.
Oh, did he? Well,
long time ago.
Mine was at least 6 or 7 years. So you're
he held a grudge. He held something over your head?
No. But I mean, Eli has just carte blanche to just rip him to death, and he can't. I guess they're partners forever. If they break up, that show's over.
And I like when he says Snyder remarked to Belichick.
Yeah, I mean,
about I don't know what it feels like to lose to you in the Super Bowl.
I know he's gotten cocky. What the hell, Eli? Yeah, I think anybody who comes out of the New York, media mass with relatively on good terms is, I guess, can say whatever he wants.
That's Cooper Manning yesterday on the Dan Patrick Show, and that is tremendous what they have done, and it spawned all these other alt-casts, some good, some not. But they're the gold standard, Eli and Peyton. And Cooper is going to be part of the Fox broadcast on Sunday. He does like this. It's kind of like a man on the street kind of thing, walks around, talks to people. It's his hometown. The Mannings, of course, grew up in New Orleans where the dad was the star quarterback with the Saints. Tom Libero's got a column today, and I'm not sure I agree with him on this. We're usually in line. Guys similar age, similar thought processes, but I'm not sure I'm fully lined up with him on this. He says that when Josh Harris announced that the name Commanders was going to stay at his news conference on Monday, he said it would have been better if he said the team was going to be called the Jayden Daniels. More fans would have welcomed that than the news that there are no plans to change the name. And there are, some people I know, friends of mine, they are not all in on the Commanders because of the name. As Tom writes, the fan base that remains from the Redskins' glory days has certainly been around long enough that some of them still refuse to pry their hands off the franchise name that they fell in love with, the name of the team since before they moved from Boston to Washington in 1937. But here's where we disagree. He's still holding on to the idea that it's more likely the team will wind up in Landover. And he points this out. He said, Jack Kent Cooke had 3 Super Bowls and nothing but winning in his pockets when he went shopping for a new stadium. Look where he wound up. This may be hard to believe, but not everyone is a football fan, meaning that there will be some resistance from the district where I thought Harris made it really clear that that's his overwhelming first choice to wind up. And then you had Commissioner Roger Goodell at his State of the Game address on Monday afternoon, going all in like how great this would be for the nation if the team wound up there. And he talked about, as a kid, going to RFK Stadium and the monuments in the background and all that. So I think that, the league is all in on this. Harris seems to be as all in as you can be while still negotiating with Maryland and, for whatever reason, Virginia. They're not going to be a factor. But this is another thing that Lavero concludes with here. He says, if the owners could turn back the clock to February 1st, 2022, the day before Washington Chief Blunder Officer Jason Wright, by the way, he's gone now, Mark Klaus, who ran Campbell's Soup as the new president of the team. The day before Wright unveiled the new name in a presentation befitting a convenience store opening. Yeah, with Dan Snyder and his wife standing there in Letterman's jackets. He says you can be sure the new name wouldn't be Commanders. They aren't thrilled with it, but changing the name for a third time in 5 years might be far more damaging than simply accepting Commanders moving forward and live with the taste and a few disgruntled fans left behind. In the path of least resistance, if the stadium quest still leads back to Landover. I don't think it will lead back to Landover. He apparently does, and he may be right, but I believe that they will get a deal done. And the comparison to Jack Kent Cooke, yes, Cooke had the 3 Super Bowl championships, but he was an irascible guy, and I don't think he had, as successful as he was, I don't think he had the business savvy that you see with Harris and Rails and Mark Ein. These 3 guys have all been very, very successful in business. Ein and Harris have been friends since they were in elementary school, and I know that Mitch Rails is one of the most successful people in the country. I think he's on the Forbes top 50 list or something like that. So I think they will get a deal done, but, Lavero is hanging on to the idea that they may wind up staying in Landover, and which is possible. But I still believe that they're going to get something done. And I would think, man, I know they're looking at 2030, but I would think there would be some type of an announcement sometime after the Super Bowl, maybe within the next 2 months or so. Or, maybe they have to work out the fine details, and maybe that's something that they use in the summertime to kind of launch ticket sales. Hey, get excited about this team. Get your tickets here. They did this with the Nationals when they played their first 3 years at RFK Stadium. Get your tickets there so when you move to the new stadium, you're going to have first priority on where you want to sit in the new place. So that could be among the plan of operation here. Vince Lombardi arrived in D.C. 56 years ago today and said, contrary to popular belief, I cannot walk across the Potomac even when it's frozen. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
It's been just over a year since Dan Quinn was introduced as the new coach of the team. And it was greeted, as you remember, with kind of a yawn, right? I mean, he had taken Atlanta to the Super Bowl. They blew the biggest lead in history, 28-3. Got fired there, went to Dallas, did a pretty good job. But in his last game as defensive coordinator in Dallas, they got their doors blown off by Green Bay at home. And it appeared after the Ben Johnson courtship, and I think there were a couple of other names that were thrown in there, he was like, okay, yeah, nobody else wants this job, so they'll take him. Well, a year later, that hire looks a whole lot different. But in the nearly 60 years that I've been a fan of this Washington professional football team, I can think of only 2 coach hirings that moved the needle. One of them was George Allen in 1971 when he came in and said the future is now. But you got to remember this about Allen. While he had been successful in Los Angeles, while the Rams had won a lot of regular season games, they flamed out in the playoffs. He never won a postseason game there. And, for a team that's looking to build championships, yeah, okay. And we'll see how this goes. Because nobody knew exactly how this was going to work. On draft day, he trades away almost all of his draft picks for 1971 and 1972 for a bunch of aging veterans. How's this going to work? I don't know how this worked out fabulously. But I'm saying the day he was introduced as the head coach, I don't think people were flipping out about that. They were happy to see a coach with experience and a winning coach, but it really was different. The feeling that we have now off this season and the hope for the future is very, very similar to me to the way it was on this day in 1969 when Vince Lombardi was introduced as the new coach of the team. Lombardi had been an assistant coach with the New York Giants when they had great teams. And talk about a coaching staff. Lombardi was the offensive coordinator. Tom Landry was the defensive coordinator. And Jim Lee Howell was the head coach and just tried to look busy in those days. And Giants were a great team. They would come up short in championship games, but they were consistently in it. They won the championship in 1956. And in 1959, Lombardi was hired as head coach of the Green Bay Packers. That was a backwater team, like they had not had success in 20, 25 years. And, it's the cold place and, it's small market, the whole thing. And he went there and he transformed it into Titletown, USA. They won 5 championships in 9 years, including 3 in a row. And after 3 straight, including the first 2 Super Bowls, he walked away. He wasn't that old. He was like 55 years old. And it was really the first indication that this job is all-consuming, especially when you win. And the word burnout wasn't used, but it was burnout. And he spent a year as the general manager, hated it. Phil Bankston, who had been his defensive coordinator, took over for him. Team had a losing record. And Edward Bennett Williams, who was the managing partner of the team, because Jack Kent Cooke owned the Lakers and the Kings, he was not allowed to operate the Redskins. And this was a big, bold move by EBW. He brought in Vince Lombardi and gave him a piece of the team. 5% of ownership. Can you imagine that now for a team worth $6 billion? But Lombardi was the one guy who was worth it. And at age 56, who wouldn't believe that he was going to coach for another 10 years? Why not? And so this was Lombardi. This is part of NFL Films feature that was done on him. And this is Lombardi explaining to the media in Green Bay where he was headed and how the announcement came on this day in 1969.
I'm under contract with the Packers as a general manager for the next 5 years, and I've asked for release from that contract. I take a position with the Washington Redskins as their executive officer, also a coach, and also for a substantial position with equity.
It was like, God is here. It was amazing.
In spite of what some of you may think, I can't walk across the Potomac even when it's frozen.
Like the Packers in '58, the Redskins were one of the worst teams in the NFL. They needed a miracle and were counting on Lombardi to bring them one. Reaching into his past to bring the Redskins into the future, he met with one-time Giants linebacker Sam Huff, who had recently retired from the Redskins.
I said to Coach Lombardi, I want to come back and play, and I can coach the linebackers and play for you. And Lombardi said, you think you could get another year or 2? And I said, I know I can for you.
The Redskins already had their Bart Starr and gifted but free-spirited Sonny Jurgensen.
He wasn't talking about rebuilding and going down the road to win. He was talking about now. He was talking about right then, and you believe that. He made everybody believe in his program.
Yeah, he was building that culture, but he did say at the news conference, Sonny's arm will likely fall off before we win a championship. And then when he got a look at Sonny in training camp, he said to one of his assistants, he said, if we'd have had Sonny in Green Bay, the NFL would have declared us a monopoly. And he had a great one in Bart Starr, but Sonny was that good. And Sonny had his best year. It was the one year that he really got himself in tip-top shape. The signature belly was gone before training camp started, and he threw for 65%, which was a big number in those days. Now it's routine to be over 70%, but in those days, 65% was a great passing percentage, and the team was rebuilding. They hadn't drafted very well. And with what he had, now he did have some Hall of Fame players. He had He had Sonny. He had Charlie Taylor, who's in the Hall of Fame. Larry Brown, who he drafted in the 8th round, and probably should get some consideration for the Hall of Fame, as well as Jerry Smith as the tight end. They had a lot of stars on offense. On defense, they had some guys who did become, great players, and Chris Hamburger's in the Hall of Fame. Brig Owens, great player. But they had holes, and he had to continue to draft well, and he had to continue to, as they say, coach them up. And in those days, this was the last year before the merger. The merger happened in the 1970 season. So postseason was tough. They only had the 2 division winners from each conference. They would play. Then you'd have the championship game, and that was it. So then, in that year, the winner would go on to the Super Bowl. And 1969, of course, was the Baltimore Colts, who were in their last year in the NFC, or the NFL, as it was called then. Or that was 68. No, 69, I'm sorry, was Minnesota. Minnesota was the representative from the NFL. And Redskins just weren't good enough to beat out the Cowboys that year. But there's other, aspects of this as well, not just the winning season, but if you look back and how ahead of his time he was, the Redskins had 3 gay players at the time. Now, at that period of time, 1969, if it came out that a team had a gay player, he was gone. You couldn't play in the league if you were gay. Well, Jerry Smith was gay, became the first known athlete to die of AIDS back in the early 80s. Dave Kopay, who was a running back on that team and was the first athlete ever, he came out in a story in the Washington Star to say that he was gay, and was gay, of course, when he was playing. They also had a running back who they drafted in the first round, I think a year or 2 earlier, named Ray McDonald. And Ray McDonald showed up late for a meeting, and Lombardi cut him on the spot. And there was speculation that, Lombardi knows he's gay, doesn't want to be a part of the team. Not at all. Lombardi had a brother who was gay. And again, a scandalous thing at the time. And what he said to the team, knowing that he had 3 gay players on it, the team knew it. Not everybody liked it, by the way. People didn't think in 69 like they think now. That's not that big of an issue. But there were players not happy about it. And Lombardi said, if I see anybody on this team mistreating a player because of, I forget how he phrased it, he's gone. And so what it was the promptness that he expected from the players, like Ray McDonald, and cut him on the spot, had nothing to do with his sexual orientation. Really a remarkable season when you look at it. They did finish 7-5-2. He had colon cancer. In the offseason, he was at Georgetown Hospital. Sonny told me he visited him then and said he was down to about 70 pounds. They did not, I guess, do colonoscopies in those days, and he died before the start of the 1970 season at the age of 57. They had a 6-8 season that year under Bill Austin, the interim coach, who'd been the defensive coordinator for Lombardi. And then in 1971, along comes George Allen, the future is now. And if you look at the period of time between 1971 and the end of the 1992 season, when they won their last Super Bowl, 21 years, that's the greatest era of Washington football ever, because you went to 5 different Super Bowls. You had the 2 different eras, really, with George Allen and Joe Gibbs. And to think that it was really Lombardi who really changed the whole image of the organization into one that had been, very backward, the last team in professional sports to integrate, not till 1962. No surprise, really crappy teams for the rest of the decade. Then Lombardi comes in, and you got the feel that I think most people in Washington who are fans of the football team feel now, that the future seems so bright. And sadly, it lasted only a year for him. But I always like to look back on the anniversary of that, because I think that's so significant. As great as Joe Gibbs was, and he's the greatest coach in the history of the franchise, when he was introduced in 1981, believe me, there was no great excitement about this, because although he had been the offensive coordinator for Air Coryell, he'd never been a head coach at any level. Nobody knew who the hell he was. And the rest, as they say, is history. All right, coming up, Clinton Yates. He's going to have a new show starting on ESPN 6:30 starting on Monday. He'll join me at 10:30. Plus more on the trade that has shook up the NBA. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 6:30.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 6:30, the sports capital.
All right, we got Bram coming up at 11 o'clock. And starting on Monday, our lineup changes. The Mike Greenberg Show, which we've carried here for the last 5 years, will be replaced at noon by the Clinton Yates Show. And Clinton's a local guy, grew up in D.C., worked for the Post, worked for WTOP, and then has gone out to Los Angeles and achieved even greater success with ESPN. You see him on Around the Horn all the time. And although you're in L.A., I'm kind of with Neil Diamond. L.A.'s fine most of the time. The sun shines, but it ain't home. How is it for you out there?
It's going well, Andy. It is a pleasure to talk to you. I will tell this story once because I have to, which is for the listeners who don't know. I first met Andy 24 years ago when I had the stones to roll up to the studio back when you and Tony were doing the show down at ESPN Zone.
Yep.
I handed Tony a stack of newspapers, and I said, I want to be a sports writer. They were all my clips. And you guys put me on the air. You were doing a bit called the Fantasy Head League where you were drafting different talking heads at ESPN. And I was the draft expert because I watched so much television. I told him, pick Carl Ravitch. This guy's on all the time. Trust me. And he picked him with the number 1 pick and blew out the league. But from there, things went on. And now I'm in Los Angeles, and it's been great. But the thing about it is, it's funny to watch things back home now.
Yeah.
Obi's done in 4 records. The Commanders are actually respectable. I just saw the Wizards made a trade, but it's always interesting to look from afar on what it is that made you who you are. And then once again, to quote Tony one more time and one last time, the teams of my youth will always be based in D.C.
Yeah, well, look, you use the word stones. In my house, they call it chutzpah. And you are probably the last journalist of your generation to say you want to be a sports writer because that's going the way of the dodo bird. You still do write though, right? You're still writing for ESPN.
I do. I still write. The site when it first started was called The Undefeated. It's now called Anscape. But I still write a lot about culture and sports and everything that interweaves between those two things. Writing to me, young journalists, and I use journalists as loosely as you do, is so important. It structures how you think. It structures how you can present your ideas. So even if you're somebody that talks on a camera or into a microphone, at the core of it is writing in terms of the way you're able to present who you are. And for me, it's always been I don't want to say my favorite mode of expression, but it's always meant the most, particularly when you're dealing with certain subjects. When you get to write about people and their lives and their missions and their causes, it has a little different effect than just talking does when they can see their name or the name of their town or their team in print, so to speak, or on the internet. It's just a different effect, Andy, and that's still something that means a lot to me.
Well, 100%. The 3 of the most successful people doing TV and radio are former columnists. Wilbon and Tony, of course, and Dan Le Batard. They've all done well. And this is what I've always felt, is when you're a columnist, you have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And although it's longer in print than a thought on the air, to frame your arguments that way is incredible training to have opinions on the air. Don't you feel that way?
Absolutely. That was part of the reason why I was interested in media to begin with, is that I was convinced when I read the newspaper as a child. I was like, oh, these are smart people. Their lives seem like they're fun, and they have a incredible grasp and command of the language in a way that was admirable. So when I finally got to what is it I want to do with my life, that was something that I thought would, make me a little bit more respectable in the world. And it turned out to be something that has been very fruitful for me personally. But this is something I plan to bring to the show, Andy. It's called Clinton and Friends. And my friends are people I've met along the way doing that exact job, formulating opinions on things, trying to present stories and arguments in a way that is convincing, illuminative, and just otherwise interesting. And that's hopefully what the vibe I can bring to the airwaves is, something I've been doing a little bit here and there, over the years. And I say a little bit, I'm joking, but that's the vibe. I am still at my core a newspaper columnist. That's what I do, and that's what I plan to bring to the airwaves.
Well, we once had a show here on Channel 9, is even before my time, called Sam and Friends, and they eventually became the Muppets. So maybe Clinton and Friends will have the same kind of success.
If I could get the Muppets on my set, that would be a life win, Andy. Forget about everything. everything.
I think they're still around, and you're in L.A., Hollywood. Why not? Why wouldn't it happen? We're talking
Not a bad idea.
We're talking to Clinton Yates, who will start. And I called it the Clinton Yates Show, but it's Clinton and Friends. It'll start Monday here on ESPN 6:30 at noon. And before we get into more of that, let's talk some hometown stuff. You watched. Yeah. My God, you're in your early 40s, so you're a little older than my son. But even for you, I mean, you don't have any recollection of the 91 season, do you?
Oh, I do. Andy, the first season I ever went to a full year of football games was that year.
Oh, you did?
I was 9 years old.
Okay.
My dad got off the list. I went to every home game and the 2 playoff games. I was at the Seat Cushion game. I was at the championship game. This was my indoctrination into sports. Before that, we had gone to Hoya's games. That was my first sort of big-time live sporting event. I went with my dad. But by the time we got off the list and went down to RFK all the time, that was the year. So I was a big-time diehard for a long time. And I'll sort of lay this out. This was what I cared about as far as football was concerned. But then the ownership changed, and then things got to where they got. And then my favorite football player of all time, got drafted, Sean Taylor, and then he passed.
Mm-hmm.
And then as things started happening, honestly, Andy, my love for football sort of died with Sean Taylor in a certain way.
Wow.
These days, I enjoy the camaraderie of the NFL. I very much like Sundays as a cultural thing, but I'm not face painting anymore. I'm not putting T-shirts on my head like I once did. But that all being said, seeing the rise of the Commanders this season has been one of the greatest community experiences I can remember in a long time. Just because all of the incoming I'm getting of people just genuinely being happy about what's going on Sundays is an unbelievable feeling. And to take it a little bit more personally, part of the reason why I truly had to step away was when people who I knew and I worked with started showing up in those congressional reports that were victims of abuse and all sorts of problems, like literal people I knew who I had their numbers in my phone and talked to. I had to make a big distance between myself and the franchise just personally. This experience with Josh Harris, with frankly, to quote, to sort of touch on the LA side, with Magic Johnson adding some level of, just general respect to what the franchise brings, never mind Jayden Daniels and Dan Quinn resurrecting his career as a coach. It's been really good to watch. It's a good national story, never mind our personal connections, obviously to the nation's capital. And I love it for them. It's not a problem for me to see that team do well remotely just because I walked away for my own reasons.
Okay, so even though your first love with the team was Redskins, and we all agree it can't be Redskins again, it was very lukewarm at best, and some they did polls like only 17% of the fans liked the names. What were your thoughts when the other day Josh Harris said they're keeping Commanders?
Honestly, Andy, my thoughts were it's about damn time you put this argument to rest. I don't use that word. I understand why people do, but I don't understand the obsession over the name. It is very weird to me, to be quite honest, that after 30-odd years of this team being absolutely deplorable in more ways than just on the football field, and you finally get a product, people are worried about this as a branding standpoint, considering the controversy as to why they changed it to begin with. I will never forget when NASCAR banned the Confederate flag officially from their ranks in terms of what was allowed to be presented at races.
Mm-hmm.
I tweeted and I said this is the single biggest thing that I can imagine that will lead to Washington's football team changing their name. Bam, it did. And that's what I'm saying. Like, if this is the side of history people want to be on, arguing about using that word, so be it. But you're not coming to dinner at my house because it's just not worth it. Are we watching the football, or are we concerned about stupid headdresses and things that we used to do? To me, this is a matter of growth that is not that difficult to let go of. Not at all.
Yeah, no,
and that's kind of the whole thing for me,
I agree. And I said this yesterday, that the basketball team has been the Wizards as long as they were the Washington Bullets. It's almost right down the middle. And Abe Pollin, after the death of his friend Yitzhak Rabin in a murder, decided he was going to change the name, and there's pushback for a while. People got over it. Maybe people don't care now because the Wizards stink, but it's a different thing. So people move on, and I think eventually, and like my grandchildren will never know anything but Commanders, so it's not a big deal. The quarterback story, and in the last 25 years, the biggest athletic star here has been Alex Ovechkin in a sport which does not rise to the level of the NFL. To have a star like Jayden Daniels, I know what it means here. What is your view from it 3,000 miles away?
I think the big part about it to me is that it shows something that I talk about all the time, which is quarterback is the worst coach position in the NFL. And this is a whole other discussion that is only of import here because the Commanders have gotten it right in the context of you pick somebody, you've developed somebody, you stayed with somebody, and there does not appear to be a problem at the position. I love Bob Griffin. He's a friend of mine. But the way that he came along between trading everybody for him and the way that the owner and the coach were fighting over him, it felt like he was never really properly embraced as to what he should be from a development standpoint. None of these issues are the case with Jayden. He's there, Heisman guy, picked him, played him, bam, success. That doesn't happen in the NFL, kiddos. Look around the league. It's not that easy to do. And for that position to be the central position as to why this team is getting better, you cannot ask for a better sort of root to stem situation as far as how you build a team. I'm so happy for a guy like Terry McLaurin, Scary Terry, who's finally got somebody that can get him the ball, and an offense, a guy like Zach Ertz actually resurrecting his career who wants to come back because of a rookie. That's crazy to think. These things don't just happen. The football team has won 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks. All of those guys were kind of also ran, guys that had sort of found the end of their careers and found a little magic. That formula worked in that era of the NFL. It's different now. And for this football team to be able to put it together and do it, I don't want to say the right way because that sounds judgmental, but the effective way, that's almost the best part about it. It's not just some random flash-in-the-pan situation. They got a guy you can build on it foundationally, Andy. You know how important that is.
Oh, yeah, and in this city where you had Doug Williams, who was fantastic in a flash, but, frankly, at the end of his career, you're looking at the next 10 years of possibly the best player in the league, an African-American at a position which he wouldn't have been allowed to play 30 years ago. I mean, this is really a remarkable change for sports.
It's a huge deal, Andy, him being a brother and the relationship he has with his mom, that whole family aspect being a big part of what the storyline is. And this is something that I say a lot that people kind of forget about regarding this franchise and its relationship with the fan base, which is something that as a kid I connected to a lot. Washington was never Oakland with the outlaw vibe. It was never Dallas with the flashy vibe. The entire point of what the fan base was for the Burgundy and Gold was good dudes who were good football players.
Yep.
That's it. And this is part of what that tradition is. So forget about the name. I want people to remember that was the whole point of why people liked this team, is that there was a certain amount of relatability to everybody involved that really connected with the fan base in and around D.C. in a bipartisan kind of way. Jayden Daniels and that whole situation is exactly that. That's the part that I love the most, being able to see, is that folks just feel good about the dudes on the field, never mind the winning. It's a great thing.
Talking to Clinton Yates, who starts Clinton and Friends here at noon on Monday on ESPN 630. I talked about this story before you came on. Mike Freeman's got a column today about Trump attending the Super Bowl. And I want to get your thoughts on that. But also, as someone at ESPN, there's, a big debate over, stick to sports, how far can you go politically? This, to me, is not a political issue. There's more to it than that. But what kind of latitude do you have, and not just what you're going to do on the radio, but your work at ESPN on that?
Well, for those that don't know, a lot of what I write about is, frankly, the intersection of black culture with sports. So there is a certain inherent politicism simply in existing as an opinion writer in that space that I bring to pretty much everything. And that's not to say that I'm out here arguing with folks about who should be doing what on whatever side of the aisle, but there are certain things that are just impossible to ignore from the lens of what race is in America. I think back to the bubble, for example, when the Milwaukee Bucks and various teams said, we're not playing. There are too many things happening across the country. And, you have to write about that in the realest sense. This whole discussion changed, Andy, when athletes themselves started talking about these things in real spaces. That became a part of the story, because if you're reporting on the reality in front of you and the actual humans playing the games are talking about it as well, then you're not making an issue of it. You're simply discussing what is being discussed in these rooms. And that's just the reality of the situation. Now, of course, that changes as far as how certain things go. Political matters are always something that I think are going to touch people in different ways. But I do think we're at a point in America where people understand that you cannot just separate the two like Neapolitan ice cream. The three, you know what I mean? That's not a real thing at this point. And, Trump is coming to the Super Bowl. I found it interesting because I don't know that I necessarily realized this. It's the first time ever that a sitting president has gone to the Super Bowl. And I was talking to Tisha Thompson, who we know from, her work in D.C., who works with us at ESPN as an investigative reporter these days. The security situation there is going to be a massive one. And this is sort of an aside, I realize that, but it's just something to think about. It's going to be very interesting. New Orleans had that circumstance with the Sugar Bowl and the Terrorism Act. And in general, for those that don't know, Kathy Lanier, former Metropolitan Police Department police chief, is now the head of security for the NFL. There is a D.C. tie there. So there's just a lot going on that has a lot of interesting ties. And I am very curious to see what the reception is for him, to be quite honest. I was at that World Series game where POTUS showed up, this particular president, and it was awkward to say the least. You know? As far as Q rating goes, I don't know if this is the best move for him, but I'm also not somebody in this administration who makes decisions like that.
No, but the security point is a very important one. I've talked about this. The first Super Bowl post 9/11 was in New Orleans, and I woke up that morning to go to the game. They said get there early. There was a ring of tanks around the Superdome, and the security has obviously changed, in those 20+ years. So I'm just, what you mentioned about the ramp up after what happened at the Sugar Bowl, and then him coming. Man, if you want to be in your seat, you better get there by noon because you're going to be standing in security lines forever. That's going to be another thing. That's
absolutely. I mean, listen, I was talking to Tisha for an episode of ESPN Daily, the podcast that I do as well, and she said she's been there the whole week. She said she's seen more uniformed officers with firearms in New Orleans than she's ever seen anywhere in her life. Like, at inauguration level security was the word that she used for what that particular part of America is doing right now, that town in New Orleans. And that, to me, is mind-boggling, especially when you think about New Orleans. Laissez les bons temps rouler. People having fun, boozing in the streets. No. You better watch yourself, player, because they're watching.
And your thoughts on them removing end racism from the end zone to have other sayings there, clearly in response to Trump being there.
Yeah, I would say so. And, just in general, what the NFL's role is in messaging regarding social issues, I think is one that is going to be an ever-changing thing in our lives. I had sort of forgotten those were even there, if I'm being quite honest, Andy. You know what I mean? Because they have become sort of part of the furniture in the way that fields look. So, that to me is what it is. I mean, I think, how do I say this? Removing it is a bigger statement, I felt, than adding it.
Sure.
Because I just, you know what I mean? I just don't know how many people are going to really negatively react to that, because it's not like it changes it. It didn't change a whole lot either way. You know what I mean? And that's kind of where I am on that. If somebody, I don't know, you remember the old movie Shawshank Redemption where he walks out of the thing and what he does is he puts on those fancy shoes because nobody's going to notice? This is akin to that for me, is that you change your shoes. Like, okay, sweet. Thanks, guys.
Exactly. All right, the first Clinton and Friends show, great trivia. First guest on the Tony Kornheiser show on ESPN was Lee Corso. First group of friends that will join you on Monday.
It is going to be probably between Mina Kimes and Kevin Clark. It is the day after the Super Bowl, so we're going relatively football heavy. And I used to do the morning roast with Mina Kimes and Dominique Foxworth. And I was just at Mina's live show here. She recorded a live pod here in Los Angeles. So probably going to be Mina. That would make sense, but we'll see how timing works out. And I'm just really looking forward to it. And I want to say this quickly before we go, Andy. Young people out there, follow and chase your dreams. You just might get it. You're listening to someone who did it, and it worked.
Absolutely. You got chutzpah. You call it stones. I call it chutzpah. And good for you. And looking forward to the show. Thanks, Clinton. Best of luck with that.
Appreciate it, Andy. Have a great week.
You too. That's Clinton Yates. And Clinton and Friends will make its debut at noon on Monday on ESPN 6:30. Stay with us. We're coming right back.